Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. It is June. We're so excited that it's a new month, and we're super excited about today's event. But before we get started, I wanted to do just a couple of quick store announcement stuff. So first up, I am John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. And if you guys are tuning in and you're thinking, wait, Murder by the Book, I thought they were primarily a mystery bookstore. We are, but we, genre readers have to stick together. We love all genres. We carry, primarily mystery, but we've been known to do events for local romance writers. We've had Jim Butcher, Brandon Sanderson, we've had Terry Brooks at the store. So we love science fiction, fantasy, kind of all of the genres. And if it's something that we're excited about or we think that there's an audience or a readership for, we are always happy to bring stuff in, even if it doesn't technically fit in the mystery genre. So that's why one of the reasons why we're very excited about today. But before I bring out all of our authors, I just wanted to make a couple of general store announcements. So for those of you who might not have visited us in a while, we are open again for browsing. We reopened in October on Halloween for customers to come in and shop with us. We're still limiting it to 6 people in the store at a time, just so we can make everybody feel comfortable. It's a small space. We'll probably be adjusting that in the next couple weeks. And we're also still asking that you wear masks, at least until kids can get vaccinated. And we also know that we still have a lot of customers that come and visit us from MD Anderson getting treatment. So again, we just want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable. If you are one of those people who is still not getting out and about in the world and you're not ready to come into the store, you can just give us a call when you pull up in to the parking lot, and we will be happy to run your purchases out to you. If you have not caught any of our virtual events, we've been doing them. I think we've got 3 this week, which is kind of a light week for us. We hope that you will also check out the store's Facebook and YouTube page. We have over, I think we've done over 200 of these with over 350 authors since the pandemic started. So there's a great wealth of events out there. Also wanted to mention, you still have a couple of days left to pre-order copies of Riley Sager's new book, Survive the Night. We're going to be sending books to him to, he's going to be personalizing those for us. Also wanted to mention, if you are curious about what book selling in the middle of a pandemic has been like, or what it takes to set up virtual events, on Wednesday, June 16th, we're going to be doing sort of a behind-the-scenes virtual event with myself, McKenna, the store owner, who's also been doing a lot of the virtual events with me, and also Sarah DeVello, who works with the Mystery and Thriller Mavens Facebook profile. So if you have questions about just book selling in general, virtual events, anything like that, we hope that you will join us back on the 16th. And before I bring our guests out, I also wanted to mention, if you have questions for any of the authors while they are chatting today, please post those in the comments either on Facebook or in the live chat on YouTube, and we will get to those in just a little bit. So I'm going to start bringing our guest out. We're going to start with Lavie. How are you today? You are muted.
Sorry, I always mute myself and then forget I'm muted. Yeah, hi, I'm very well, a little bit sunburnt, but just happy to have a bit of sun for once.
Yeah, we have gotten a little bit of sun here today in Houston, but it definitely looks like it is going away. So for anybody who is joining us and is not familiar, Lavie is the World Fantasy Award-winning author of Osama, The Violent Century, and the Jerwood Fiction Undercovered prize-winning A Man Lies Dreaming, and the Campbell Award-winning Central Station. In addition to many other works and several awards, he works across genres, combining detective and thriller modes with poetry, science fiction, and historical and biographical material. His work has been compared to that of Philip K. Dick by The Guardian and Financial Times, and to Kurt Vonnegut's by Locus. So he is going to be leading our conversation today as we talk about the best of world science fiction. And I'm going to bring out the rest of our guests. Next, we're going to bring out Silvia Moreno-Garcia. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So Sylvia is the best-selling author of the novels Mexican Gothic, Gods of Jade and Shadow, Certain Dark Things, and Untamed Shore, and a bunch of other books. She has also edited several anthologies, including the World Fantasy Award-winning She Walks in Shadows, a.k.a. Cthulhu's Daughters. Next up, we are going to bring out Yi-Sheng. How are you today?
I'm very well, and it's night over here in Singapore.
I was going to say, thank you so much for joining us in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I couldn't anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to check something. I think Lavie asked me to moderate today,
Oh, okay.
so
Oh, yeah,
I'll be questions rather than Lavie.
Perfect. Okay.
I don't know who's moderating. Well, it looks like we have a moderator.
Yeah, actually, now that you say that, I do remember Yi-Sheng is going to be the one moderating for us. So he's a Singaporean LGBT.
I don't know.
Oh.
There.
So before we went live, Lavie told us that he is joining us from a horse farm with questionable Wi-Fi. So we're gonna power through this, which I guess is a good thing that we don't have him moderating for us. I guess Yi-Sheng is going to be moderating. He's a Singaporean LGBT plus activist, writer, and researcher with a special focus on Southeast Asian history and folklore. His books include the speculative fiction collection Lion City and SQ21, Singapore Queers in the 21st Century. He also edited publications such as Sanctuary, short fiction from Queer Asia, Exhale, an anthology of queer Singapore voices, and A Mosque in the Jungle, classic ghost stories by Othman Wak. He tweets and Instagrams at Yishkabab. So I will drop a link for that in comments too. And last but certainly not least, we're going to bring out R.S.A Garcia. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So Rhonda lives in Trinidad and Tobago with an extended family and too many dogs. Her debut science fiction novel, Lex Talionis, received a starred review from Publishers Weekly and the silver medal for Best Sci-Fi Fantasy Horror Ebook from the Independent Publisher Awards. She has also published short fiction in international magazines, including Clarkesworld, Abyss, and Apex, Internazionale Magazine, Italy, and several anthologies. So I'm going to turn it over to Yi-Sheng and let you guys get chatting. As I said, for anybody who is watching, if you have questions, please post those in the comments, and we will get to those in a little bit. Y'all have a good conversation, and I will see you soon.
Oh, bye-bye, John. Okay, hey, so it's amazing to be here with all of you. I mean, like, there's the usual. There's this strange delight in some certain pandemic events, because before the pandemic, you would, all these the mainstream literary events would all be local. So those of us who aren't situated in London, near London or New York, we wouldn't be able to have these opportunities. But now that everything's virtual, if you've got a Wi-Fi connection, which people in horse stables don't really have, it seems, we're on a strangely equal playing field, which feels rather appropriate for, a book like this, The Best of World SF. I just wanted to start off with, Lavie, did you want to say something?
Can you show the book?
Now the book.
All right.
I haven't actually got a copy here. That is such a pretty book, but I just say.
God, it is. Look
shiny. At all that shiny foil.
Yeah. I mean, like, it is crazy. I cannot take it out on public transport. It's like, so I've had to just park it in my toilet to read stories one by one. I mean, because I do like my hard copies rather more than soft copies. But
Why do you guys have a hard copy? I have a soft copy.
Yay.
Oh.
Well, this will last, longer, because I treat my books like trash despite my love for them. So yeah, but
I think that was sort of the idea, is to finally do a book that is just as a physical object. It's something that's going to sit on a shelf, not just for this year, but for 10 years, for 20 years. Even if it just ends up in a handful of libraries, at least it's a durable book. You can, if you live in a more tropical climate, as you can kill cockroaches with it, which is, that's kind of my scale for books, is whether you can kill cockroaches with it. And this one is respectable.
I did want that does actually dovetail into something I wanted to mention, though, because this is not your first attempt at creating an anthology of world science fiction. As early as 2009, Lavie's been doing put together the Apex book of world SF, and which had 5 issues. You asked several different writers to do it, and to edit each version. And I've had several Singaporean friends in there, and so you've actually been trying to to share this vision of World FSF long before it was fashionable. And in the book, in that splendidly written intro, you do talk about your delight and wonderment that suddenly it is fashionable.
I'm not sure it is. I'm still not sure it is fashionable. You know, if you look at the numbers of books being published by international writers in genre, the numbers are so tiny. And in a way, I think short stories are leading the way. You know, the magazines are much more diverse internationally than the imprints, the publishers. But yeah, it's kind of like you're repeatedly banging your head against the wall trying to make this thing happen. And I was lucky initially that, you know, the Apex Publishing, which is a small press based in Kentucky, of all places, you know, and Jason Sizemore runs it. He's a very stubborn person. And I just said to him, look, we're not going to make any money doing this. You know, 200 people are going to buy this book, but it's worth doing this book. And he kind of, he said, okay, let's do it. So we literally put together the first one just out of, you know, as I say in the introduction, kind of like with buttons and string. We didn't have a budget. We didn't have the authors. You know, it was very different. But even since then, every time we would do another volume, and I would try and approach one of the bigger publishers and say, can we do a big version of this? And they would do, you know, editors either ghost you. They just never reply to emails. One big publisher took 45 minutes to turn down this very detailed proposal that I spent, like, you know, hours doing. And I'm like, no. So, you know, it felt like a small miracle to actually get this book finally done and so beautifully.
Yeah, actually, you were talking about striving to try and popularize world science fiction, and that's something you're doing together with Sylvia in the Washington Post. I mean, and Sylvia's also been editing anthologies of, so I'd like to ask you, Sylvia, why do you feel this is important? I mean, rather than just concentrating on your own writing, why do you feel this need to promote other voices?
Yeah, I think Lavie and I just, you know, we kind of rolled into the Washington Post column by kind of luck. We got that gig, and I didn't think we were going to get that gig. But we did, and they let us kind of do whatever we want. So in that vein, we do tend to read a lot of across genres, across time periods, and across different cultures. That's just the way we like to read. So it basically reflects our reading taste. A lot of the things that are cross-genre, I find sometimes you don't find them in the major big mainstream releases that they promote, like, you know, the one big book of the season. It doesn't tend to be like that cross-genre. So we often are drifting to kind of the sides, either kind of indie presses or international writers, and going back and forth, sometimes going back and forth in time. It's just a function of our taste. But the other thing is, well, there's two things. One is that I often hear sometimes complaints about how, like purists who love science fiction and who love like the rockets, you know, the rocket that goes into space, that is science fiction and nothing else is science fiction. So those people who love hard science fiction often tell me hard science fiction is not being produced anymore. Like that kind of science fiction is not being produced anymore. And so I hate science fiction nowadays. And I feel that if they would just give international science fiction a chance, they would be really surprised that a lot of what they want of that hard sci-fi is still being produced in other parts of the world, because you know, the same thing that is happening literally in, like, the same thing that's popular going on in a cultural circle in Canada or in the US is not the same thing that's going on in Singapore or in other parts of the world. I sometimes meet international writers, and I remember meeting an international writer who told me that in his part of the world, they had basically Asimov and like Clark and like an old kind of like golden age sort of sci-fi. That's what they had in bookstores, and that's what he had discovered as sci-fi. So he didn't know anything else about like the modern kind of sci-fi writers. He was just kind of starting to discover them. So he was literally working in a different mode, and the people around him were working in a different mode. That if readers in the United States had, given that an opportunity, they would actually kind of have enjoyed it. But often people have weird ideas about what it constitutes to read international sci-fi. They think it's going to be boring or confusing or something like that. And so, one of the things is that there's a lot of stuff out there that people just don't know about, and that they might actually really enjoy if they gave it a chance. And we want to kind of show people this vast universe of stuff. And yeah, the other one is just our taste. I will say that whenever we do a Washington Post column that is more like we did one on African and kind of diaspora kind of writing recently, and they're not very popular. Like we get a lot more hits when we say like Stephen King. Like we mentioned Stephen King's It in a circus column recently, because we had to, it has the clown, but then the titles that we went into were other titles, including Clarkesworld, which is an old kind of very odd sci-fi novel that I discovered thanks to Lavie, and now I'm kind of really interested in that writer. But people were, they kind of focus on the things they know. They saw Ray Bradbury, because I mentioned Something Wicked This Way Comes in my, and so they were kind of like Ray Bradbury. And so we can get a lot of hits when we basically talk about, the big names, and that's what people come for. And it's kind of hard to show people these other kinds of works, but they're out there. And the column, since it mixes a lot of different stuff, I mean, my hope is that people will find some of those other titles mixed with the usual suspects. And although, yes, we get a lot more hits when we talk about Stephen King, I have, we received some emails at the Washington Post and some feedback on social media where people say, thank you. I've discovered a lot of stuff thanks to this column that I wouldn't have known otherwise, which is good to know that we're not totally lost in terms of what we're trying to do. But I will say that the number one complaint that we get on the column is that people are like, that's not, that's not science fiction, or that's not sci-fi sometimes. Like, or there's no, like there's some kind of rigid boundary making that sometimes happens in Western audiences that, they're like, there was no sci-fi mentioned in the column this month, and we had like 3 sci-fi titles, right? But just because there's not a rocket on the cover, but we do have a rocket on our cover, because there's not a rocket on the cover doesn't mean it's not like science fiction. Yeah, there's a lot of different science fiction. But I mean, maybe we're doing our small little bit of work in the world to help people get away from the rocket and enjoy the rocket and all the other things that are not rockets, and also to show them some of the other stuff that we have found interesting that comes from many different parts of the world. So,
yeah, it's not just Western audiences, I've got to say, because I did also go like look through this and go like, oh, some of these stories, are they really science fiction? Yeah, but they were still great stories. Lavie, did you want to chip in?
I did actually ask for, I insisted on having the rocket ship.
Oh, he wanted the rocket ship. Okay.
And I really wanted the little robot on the M.
Oh, okay.
On the W, sorry.
And
just the little robot, yeah, on the W. And they were like, okay, you can have the rocket ship, but maybe leave the robot for the next volume.
Okay, the robot will appear in the next volume too.
Okay.
So if we do a fantasy one, you can put a unicorn, right?
Yeah, I suggested a fantasy one. They were less enthusiastic.
Perfect.
No, we did try and keep this one because the Ebook books are very mixed. Because me and Sylvia share the same idea. The genre, it's a mixed bag. It's horror, fantasy, it's all the same to me. And with this one, I was trying to go for the more, as you said, for the more core science fiction. That it had the spaceships and the robots. So people know what they're getting, and then I try to sneak in the weirder stories that I like, just in between. So people are still going, they might complain about the few weird stories that I put in, but you got to have a little bit of variety.
I always like, I'm always fascinated by people who object to a story because it's not hard science enough, or it doesn't feel sci-fi enough. Like I didn't grow up with that boundary between my brain that this and only this is science fiction. And I don't think a lot of readers who started back then did either. I think this is a very a progress that over time people started figuring out ways to exclude certain things they personally didn't like, and then we came up with these new definitions for things. Because when you think about something like, let's say, oh, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, which is like one of the most famous science fiction stories in science fiction, what in it is science fiction? There's nothing in it to do with technology. And I get the feeling that a lot of people believe that technology is a must for science fiction and fantasy, and that if technology is not at the heart of the story, or if the story falls apart without it, then it doesn't work. And The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas completely works, has nothing to do with technology, and is absolutely accepted as a science fiction story. But then you have, I often wonder, would it have been as accepted if she wasn't writing from North America? You know? So sometimes I think the barriers that they put in place have a lot less to do with what the story is about, or even the subliminal understanding of where our line is, and more to do with people trying to exclude things that they personally feel, oh, I didn't really like that, or oh, that made me uncomfortable, you know?
I will also say I work at a faculty of science of a university, and a lot of my science is accurate, but people often don't know as much as they think they know about science. So their ideas of what is accurate and based on something are kind of out of whack. We are always extrapolating, right? I mean, Mary Shelley is extrapolating in Frankenstein. There was some real science behind it, galvanism of the time period. And you can say the same thing about other works. There's a lot of science in Dracula, even though it's supernatural, but the kind of work that they're doing with the doctors, the kind of stuff that they're talking about does have a real scientific basis. And so that is, you look at that, and then sometimes you look at what we consider some of the great science greats, like Philip K. Dick, and they're like, there's no solid, like kind of scientific basis for any of that. You're talking basically fantasy at one point, but we kind of accept it as being scientific fact. And sometimes I'm using things that I know are solid. Like I talk to scientists, I have friends who are scientists, and yet, I put it in a book like Prime Meridian, which is included in the world of sci-fi, and people go like, that's not really science. And I'm like, is it not? Or do you just have like, a very narrow definition of science fiction and of science? But yeah. The other thing is that science is also very, I'm not going to say boring, but it's a lot more office-like than a lot of people think. There's some people who do go into the field, like if you're studying jellyfish or whatever, you probably have a lot of jellyfish nets and catching things. But a lot of, you do your field work, you come back and you spend a lot of time in an office, in a lab, and not even in a lab coat, but although you should, I should say, you should follow the office protocols. But yeah, you're just checking a computer and checking a lot of data, doing a lot of reading. So we get kind of this image of what it means to be, I guess, a scientist, and then we expect all our science fiction to be like that, and our scientists to behave like that, to be one person, like the stereotype of the white guy in the white lab coat kind of idea. And so that's also problematic, because not everybody is a guy, not everybody is, is wearing that kind of lab coat. But anyway, so we establish boundaries, and they fall into other things.
Yeah, and I think that people forget that fully half of the term science fiction is fiction, and it's perfectly accepted and expected that you extrapolate. You don't have to be absolutely up on the latest possible science for me. I'm sorry, because there are things about that science cannot explain. There are many, 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 many things that science hasn't gotten around to explaining, can't explain, is still arguing over. So deciding that you're going to go, okay, I'm going to take this thing and start from here and go there, I think that's a completely valid, normal thing we've been doing since the beginning of time. And it's really up to what it is you like and what it is you prefer, but it doesn't help a whole lot to dismiss something just because it doesn't fit into your little box.
Yeah, actually, Rhonda, I loved your story, "The Sun from Both Sides." I mean, it's calling back to all those wonderful, wonderful space opera, tropes that we had before we realized that it's going to be very, very, very difficult to do interstellar travel based on what real life physics. And I found out that, well, unfortunately, Sylvia didn't get her hard copy in time. So you and I are the only two of us non-editors who have actually been able to read this whole book. And
I got mine yesterday at 7 p.m. So.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, look at this. I do not expect you to have read all of it,
I haven't even read all of it. I've been literally bouncing around, reading things as they come to me, like what sounds interesting, and just diving into it. And thank you so much for saying you liked my story, because I loved your story. Loved it. I was literally reading it to my sister earlier today while she was cooking. There were so many callbacks in it to all the science fiction I grew up with and loved, from Ansibles to positronic brains and sonic screwdrivers, So it's one of my favorites, definitely.
Well, thanks so much. I'm much more of a newcomer to the world of international SFF publishing than the rest of you, and so, I submitted that more. I wrote that almost as a pastiche, but it's. But yeah, I'm just so pleased that other people like it. Because it's weird, because it's both. I am referencing all these other science fiction franchises. Sylvia's doing something similar because she incorporates all these vintage B movies about Mars exploration in Prime Meridian.
Yes.
It was, for me, it was very, very much also about Singapore history and the weirdness of always having this narrative of Singapore history and like trying to look at it in a new way.
I just loved it. It felt like a homage to all the things that you cared about, and to your history and to your present and to your future, and and I'm very interested in that sort of thing. I'm actually really interested in stuff that melds and blurs that line between past, present, religion, science, future, and so many other ideas and ideals. I know sometimes I have to hold things back when I'm doing stuff on the page, at least to confuse the reader, but you blended it so well. There's so much in it in such a short story, but it was never too much, and what it had to say. And I also love the structure of it. I'm a big fan of structure. So Sylvia's story with the screenplay and the way that you're telling, the way that you masterfully told that story, I just loved both of them so much.
Yeah, you mentioned past and present, and I really liked how those came together in Vandana Singh's Delhi. It's literally about a guy going, who can see both the past and the future in the city of Delhi. But also, one I wanted to mention was Malena Salazar's Eyes of the Crocodile from.
Oh my God, yes! I think that was one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, because there's this thing I've been trying to theorize what is Southeast Asian speculative fiction, and I had this whole idea about it being very much about this post-colonial thing about saying we want to hold on to our heritage, everything that the independence generation said was not modern enough and had to be left behind. Maybe you'll only hold on to some national dress or something, and saying no, we can move with this into the future as well. And I realized, well, no, lots and lots of people are doing this around the world.
Yes.
Trying to say we want to go into the future without losing our identities.
Yeah, definitely. My story was based very much on my Trinidadian society.
And it's weird because I can't tell that very much because I haven't been to Trinidad. Yeah.
So maybe not so much in this one. I did write a prequel sequel that came out in Clarkesworld this year, and you see a little bit more of the Kyrie, and that's more of the society that that's based on my home. But there were certain ways, certain callbacks, certain ways that she talks, certain things that she references. Like when people from Trinidad read it, they're like, "Oh my God, this is a Trinidadian society." And I see that in a lot of other stories as well. And I really love that. I love to see that cultural authenticity, that relevance pop up in stories when you read it, and yet you have that universal appeal.
Yeah, it occurs to me as well, like we are the two writers on this panel who didn't migrate. We're trying where we are writing where we're born, and that does set some limits about on the amount on our ability to interface with the global publishing world, but it is also but it also gives us a little more confidence to say, like, we know what we're talking about. Actually, yeah, this is something that Lavie mentioned in an earlier discussion. Was it difficult for you and Sylvia to break into international publishing?
Very difficult. There's literally no publishing industry in my country to speak of. What we really publish is like textbooks, or someone's memoirs, stuff like that. There's no agents, there's no publishers searching for writers or anything like that. And I started very young. I just had this crazy idea. I don't know. I fell in love with books at a very, very young age. And then I got this idea when I was around 14 that this is what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And every teacher I had was like, no, you can't do that, because West Indian society is completely like, it's a lot like Asian society in that no doctor, lawyer, politician, that sort of thing. They're like, no, writing things is not, you're not going to make any money at that. You can't dance or sing. What is this nonsense you're speaking of? No, be an engineer, So I kind of kept that pretty much to myself. And I knew I couldn't do it here. So I started researching how to do it outside, and it was impossible. I bought books, and the books would tell you, send your stuff away to this particular publisher in this particular country in an envelope, a self-addressed envelope, and the self-addressed envelope
with international reply coupons.
Right? And it cost you like $1 million to send this thing off, and then you'd never hear back. No one ever replied to any of my SASEs, And of course, the books I'm reading are like 3 years out of date. The agents moved on, the publishers closed or whatever. And your library is 50 years out of date. And so the only reason I got anywhere at all was the advent of the internet. Thank God for the internet. Thank God for the online writers workshop for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Thank God for having understanding bosses who were like, yeah, after you finished working, you can stay behind and use the computer, because I didn't have a computer of my own, And I went into the OWW, as we called it, and there was all these resources about how to find an agent, how to find a publisher, how to write a query letter, what your manuscript should look like. And I was like, holy crap, this stuff is just here for free. And I was like writing it down. And even that didn't work. You sent out for years and you wouldn't even get an acknowledgement. I will never forget my debut novel was rejected by one publisher with a very terse note that at the time, of course, it was overwritten. I just finished it. I had no idea how long novels were supposed to be. And the novel was about 100,000 words, 130,000 words, I think. And he said, that's not one novel, that's 2 novels. And we're not interested in either. So I was just like, wow, okay, that was hard. At the end of it, got really freaking lucky. And I think it's really important that people understand that luck does play a huge part, and the other part is just not giving up. I just did not give up. And finally, someone somewhere saw what I had written and was like, this is really nice. By chance, do you have this book? And I was like, sure, it's in a trunk. At this point, I'd been rejected like so many times. I didn't even take it seriously. I was just like, here, sure, have it. I didn't review it. I didn't do anything. And they were like, oh, I kind of like this. Would you like to talk about how we could bring this thing to fruition? And I was like, I'm sorry, your rejection letter got lost. I got an acceptance letter or something by accident. And that's basically how I got out there. And it was such a small press. It was such an indie press. And I have to thank God for indie presses who take the chances sometimes that much bigger publishers can't afford to do. People like Head of Zeus and Dragonwell Publishing and Neon Hemlock and all of these people really give people like us a chance to put stuff out there that in years gone by would never have seen the light of day. I swear to Christ. And the only other reason any other writing has come out from me to the rest of the world It's because of short fiction. It's because of magazines like Clarkesworld and Apex and Uncanny and Fire, you know, who do the hard work of inviting everybody into the tent, you know, so that we can at least, you know, while the publishers are like looking for the next big bestseller that doesn't look like you, you can at least stay kind of relevant to your audience.
It's kind of weird how you're, you know, I didn't realize that Trinidad was like this, because we've literally been, you know, in Singapore, we're very linked up to the Commonwealth, and we've been, you know, reading V.S. Naipaul and, you know, various West Indian writers as part of our common, you know, post-colonial heritage. And it didn't realize, and
if you want to get published here, you can, but they're looking for contemporary post-colonial fiction. They're looking for the next V.S. Naipaul, who is, of course, Trinidadian. They're looking for the next Michael Anthony. They're looking for the next Derek Walcott. They're really not interested in genre fiction. That was the real problem for me. Nobody wanted to read it. Nobody wanted to teach it. Nobody wanted to discuss it. Everybody was reading it, but nobody wanted to admit that this was an actual serious endeavor, you know? They were like, you can't be Stephen King, so why are you even looking at that? No, that's not realistic. You know, try something else. You know, try to be Michael Anthony, try to be Samuel Selvin, be relevant. You know, talk about what you know. I heard that so many times. Talk about what you know. You know, and I was like, so why can't I know how I want to be in the future? Like, what's the problem with imagining a future for us? Am I going somewhere that I didn't know? Am I going to stop living now and other people get to be in the future and I don't?
I think it's the same basically in all the world except the US and the UK, because in Mexico we also have a publishing industry, but it's a literary publishing industry because that's where the grant money comes from. But in Canada, we have the same problem. There's one genre imprint and it's very small. I'm not talking about subsidiaries like, you know, not like Penguin Random House Canada. But like there's one only that does science fiction and fantasy, and it's very small. And then there's other tiny ones. But in terms of like, if I wanted to publish only with Canadian imprints, I wouldn't have a career. And if I wanted to publish only with Mexican imprints, I wouldn't have a career either. Everything skews kind of literary and kind of realistic contemporary, maybe some historical and that kind of stuff. And you do find people that do kind of weird cross-genre things. But again, they are literary writers. That's how they're recognized in Mexico and in other parts of Latin America. That's where you find their books, even if there's no such thing as a horror writer or anything like that in commercial publishing. And so I think really the UK and the US are very strange spaces because they are unlike the rest of the world. They have had kind of genre as a commercial, their roots are in pulp. And for all of the rest of the world, our speculative fiction, it comes from like literary circles. That's where you find kind of like the Gothic fiction and all these other kinds of fiction are coming through these very quote unquote serious sort of writers. And they have this completely different stream of how their fiction developed. And that's maybe why sometimes there's this kind of weird cross-boundary thing where they look at some of the stuff that we want to do and they're like, well, that doesn't belong. And it's because we don't have the same trajectory. I think Mexican comic books parallel that kind of pulp fiction, but that's a very different medium. That was kind of like the medium of the masses, not books per se. And so we had horror comic books and things like that sold very well, but they were these little, I have some, I can show one to you in a minute, but there was little cheap little thingies that the bus drivers would read. They would read like these pornographic comic books or horror comic books in these rinky dinky buses while they were waiting, to get the fare on. So they're reading these things. And then there was a robot on the cover and he was chasing a woman who had really big breasts kind of situation. So they were reading, genre fiction. But if you went to the bookstore, there were only the lofty people like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and that kind of stuff. And he was nowhere near the fantasy section, right? He was in the nice section. And then you had one shelf when I was growing up, one shelf where they kind of put Stephen King and everybody who was translated, Dune, Tolkien, and they just kind of jammed them in that little section. And they said, that's that thing. And here is literature all around you, right? And like, there's those American people. So yeah, it's a different system. And I think it's like convergent evolution, right? Completely different ecosystems. We both arrive at kind of, my husband says that, oh, what's the perfect shape? Crabs. Crabs seem to appear in nature very easily. It's a shape that seems to form very, you can have two crabs, appearing in two different parts of the world, and they're not really genetically, their phylogenetic tree is not, it's not the same, but they can look very similar. So it's like that. You've got like these two crabs that look the same, but we came from totally different parts of the world. And maybe that's why when we look at one crab, we expect it to have like the really big claw and the tiny one. And if it doesn't have it, then it's not sci-fi.
I mean, I think you get, from my experience, from what I've seen, you basically get two tracks in most countries where you get literature and you get what's called marginal literature, which is, as you said, the stuff that's sold in kiosks. And, with the Hebrew stuff, with the Israeli stuff, I've taken to collecting some of this stuff when I can, because it's, as you said, it's these tiny pamphlets. They're very fragile and they don't last for decades. And then you realize there was this entire world of disposable literature that was romance and erotica and crime and science fiction. A lot of it in children's literature as well, which is not considered respectable. And then I think the other problem that happened was, I can't zoom. But the other problem is that genre was considered the stuff that comes in translation. So, if it's American, it's good. And if you try and write it locally, it's immediately bad because it's not American.
Yeah,
and that's a very difficult thing to try and change.
Yeah. You get criticized for both reasons. You get criticized because why are you trying to be like the foreigners? You're a bad local. But then if you're working in the United States or whatever, like I am, and in the English language, with American publishers, then you get like the white American saying, why are you not ethnic enough or something like that? So you get attacked by both kinds of things. And I know a lot about rock in the 1970s and 60s in Mexico, and it's the same thing. Rock originally in Mexico, singers were singing in English. Right? They were not singing in Spanish because they were singing songs by the Beatles and things like that. And even the first composers composing rock in Mexico are composing in English. So, which is very weird to see a band of people who are like all Mexican. They can't even speak English that well, but they're singing, sha-la-la-la. Because that's what they found interesting, right? They were walking one day in Tijuana. They were from the border. They heard this song and they were like, this is the coolest thing ever. I want to do that. So they go and they do it, but there's pushback from both ways. There's pushback from the local scene and from the other scene. So it's a very odd space to inhabit. We should have a Q&A. I'm seeing this now.
Yes.
We need
Q&A.
Come to John. Like we should have a. Yeah, let's kind of hear what what our readers have to say.
All right.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I just do want to say that in Singapore right now, we are actually starting to have a revival of, some of the old pulp stuff. Like I mentioned, like, these are 1950s Malay language ghost stories, which we're republishing in English and which I was editing. And I just hope that there's this similar revival of pulp stuff, of like understanding that all this lowbrow stuff is often really fantastic. I hope that can happen throughout the world. John.
Yeah,
sorry, I'm dying for a copy of that, by the way.
Oh, I'll send it to you.
I've been coveting it on Facebook and being too polite to mention. Give me. Sorry, John, to you.
So we're starting to see too, especially like in crime fiction, there are a lot of, and like you guys have said, it's small publishers who are starting to republish a lot of the crime fiction classic stuff that just hasn't been available forever. That was sort of kind of the building blocks of kind of what we know as genre. So it's nice to see with kind of the internet and people being able to get their hands on this stuff to be able to see a lot of that stuff come back. And this conversation has been fascinating. It's kind of like like when I said in the beginning, you know, even though we're primarily a mystery bookstore, like as a genre, readers and lovers all have to stick together. So we do have a couple of questions. One is, so can y'all talk a little bit about how you approach a short story versus approaching a full-length novel? Let's start with Sylvia.
Yeah, I started writing short stories and then I moved onto novels. To me, short stories are like a canapé. It's just like, somebody's walking around with a tray and you eat this thing that has a sausage on it and it's really delicious. But if you had 50 of those, you get a stomachache. Yeah. But a novel is hopefully like a 3-course meal with your soup, your entree, and then your dessert. And yes, I am hungry. I haven't had lunch. So they're just different experiences. And I hope, when you read a short story of mine, yes, it's this kind of this delicious canapé.
And how about you, Lavie?
I hate novels. I was talking to Sylvia last week about it, I think. I absolutely hate novels. And you have to write them because otherwise, you should get a proper job and don't really want to work. So I'm really a short story writer. I love short stories. I love the fact that they're short. I love the fact that you can finish them. I'm working on a novel at the moment, and it's taken a year so far, and it's 135,000 words with, no end in sight and 40 years of history. And it's like, kill me. I hate this. And also, I think if I put on my editor's hat for a minute, this is the only place where we really see where science fiction is. Has always been in short stories. It's always been a short story genre first, ever before there were novels. And I think most novels are kind of bloated things, they're really just short stories that people pad and pad and pad and pad with not enough to hold them. So if you want to know where science fiction is now, you look at short stories. If you want to see where science fiction or fantasy or whatever was, 5 years ago, you look at novels. So yeah, short stories all the way for me. But
And how about you, Rhonda?
So I am the person who started writing novels before I started writing short stories, long before I started writing short stories. So I always love the length of it because I like my story to last me a good long while. I want to get into it. I love the characters. I want to walk around with them for a long time. And so when I started writing short fiction, it was really about, can I write short fiction? Because I love to talk. Novels were perfect for me, And then I was like, can I actually be this concise? And I started approaching it from, how do I do this? Because it's so big, it's so massive. I love pacing. I learned how to do all this pacing. It stretches out. You learn how to plot for an entire novel or whatever. And then all of a sudden you have a few thousand words. And I had to, over time, approach it as, okay, so first off, you're gonna have to hint at the world building rather than give them the world building. You're gonna have to focus. You're going to have to let go of a whole lot of description, and you're going to have to make sure that your concept is central and you can kind of wind that around it, right? So that's what the really successful short story writers do so well. I do not count myself amongst these people, so my short stories get too long anyway and have too much world building and probably too many concepts, but they're a lot more focused than my novels, I would say. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that when you're doing a short story, you're really exploring a concept or an idea or people or a situation or something like that. You're playing in this little box. And with the novel, the box is a whole lot bigger and you can even step outside it if you like.
Yeah. And how about you, Yi-Sheng?
Well, I'm still trying to write a novel, as I haven't published a full novel, but okay, I started from poetry, so already a short story is pretty ambitious for me, but it really does feel like with a short story, it's like, Rhonda said play, and it really does seem like a foray, an opportunity to experiment, a chance to just have fun with an idea and run with it. And with a novel, it feels like it. Yeah, you're not running with it. Yeah, you're just bearing it for pages and pages, and I'm still trying to learn how to do that sport.
Yeah.
My novel runs with me.
So, can you guys talk a little bit about what is something that you've read recently that you've loved? And I know, as authors and editors, there's a lot of times where you have to read things for blurbs or you have to read things for work. So what's something that you've read lately that you've loved, and what, if you're reading for pleasure, do you typically pick up? Let's go reverse order and start with Yi-Sheng.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing I'm reading right now, where is it? Right. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of SP, a Thai science fiction writer and fantasy writer who was publishing a lot in the 80s and 90s in the America. I found this 1994 novel he wrote called Jasmine Nights. And it's this amazing coming of age story about, this crazy rich Asian kid in 1960s Bangkok meeting, an African American kid and just getting up to like these crazy shenanigans while written in epic language and like having magical realist dreamlike things. It's like that he's another guy who's like straddled the world of science fiction and literary fiction and is just also been weirdly has kind of fallen out of mainstream, canons. Yeah.
Is this SP Somto?
Yeah, is it Somto or Somtao? I don't know.
Oh, he was in the first anthology I did.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
So.
All right. And how about you, Rhonda?
So aside from the fact that I absolutely adored Eyes of the Crocodile in this collection, I have to say that I recently read something from Baffling Magazine by Jen Brown, but I cannot remember the name of this story. Please forgive me, Jen. But it was this amazing. It's Baffling Magazine is like short fiction, flash fiction, but it was this brilliant pistache of this massively huge world that had come down to basically an assassin that had fallen in love with someone who she was supposed to kill, and they were fully aware of who they were to each other and all of that. And it was just so brilliantly emotional and fun and vivacious and colorful, and the magic system was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And that really stuck with me, as well as this amazing novelette or novella, I think it was, by Arula Ratnakar in Clarkesworld this year, Submergence. I love the science in it. She had she was talking about a global pandemic and using sponges from beneath the sea to try to treat this horrible disease. And there were so many other things that were going on in the story. At the heart of it was actually the scientists investigating the death of another scientist connected with this whole effort to deal with this pandemic by replaying her memories, like essentially becoming her, so that she could find out what had happened in the days leading up to her death. And there's so much more to it as well. It's also another queer love story. But those are two things that stuck with me. And also, I would say I think it was Dancing for Ugushko, which is by Samim Siddiqui, which was also in Clarkesworld this year. I read a lot of Clarkesworld.
And how about you, Lavie?
I started reading Sylvia's new book. And then I forgot to bring it with me, and I'm stuck. I haven't got anything to read at the moment. It's pretty bad. I should just be gearing up, hopefully, to maybe start looking at, a second volume of The Best of All the Seth. Fingers crossed. So that should keep me busy for quite a while. I think the main book that I'm trying to get through at the moment is Kazuo Ishiguro's new book. Clara and the Sun. And I'm a huge Kazuo Ishiguro fan. And I just can't, at the moment, get into the mood for it. You have to be in the mood for Ishiguro. And, everything is always about service and, unreliable narrators who are not quite understanding the world around them, and I just can't. I'm kind of slowly plodding my way through it, but I thought his last book, The Buried Giant, when he kind of took a step out of his comfort zone, I thought was absolutely brilliant. And I wish more people in fantasy actually paid attention to that book, because it was a brilliant Arthurian fantasy. So yeah, I'm the worst read person, considering I'm the editor of this book. I'm the worst read person here, so shocking.
Well, like we said, when you have to edit and you do things like that, then there's a lot of stuff you have to read, which takes time away from the stuff you want to read. Even if they do overlap, it still kind of takes away from the other stuff that you potentially want to get to. I totally get that. How about you, Sylvia? You're muted. There you go.
Yeah. Lavie has a circus book coming out this year, The Escapement. Yes, and so that's how we ended up doing a circus column for the Washington Post this month. So I was reading a lot of circus fiction that, I was like, all right, thank you for that, Lavie, because yeah. But I ended up reading Clarkesworld, and I'm thinking about that book a lot because it is a really unusual sci-fi novel where basically a spaceship crash landed and it was full of circus people. So now there's a circus civilization on a planet. The weirdest kind of Star Trek scenario. Star Trek did have the Western planet and the Greek planet, but there's like a circus planet. And it's led me on this kind of mental kind of question of like, why don't we do that kind of stuff more often, be a little bit more outlandish in sci-fi and speculative fiction? So I've been thinking about that book. But in terms of stuff that is not circus related, not like my homework that I had to do for this month, I did pick up Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Caw, which is coming out in October. And that's a ghost story. I think because I did Mexican Gothic, everybody expects me to be reading horror. So I'm giving you that one. It's a haunted house story. But it's not a Victorian haunted house. It's like a Japanese folklore haunted house. So if you like things like The Ring and women with long dark hair that come out of bathtubs, you will like this too. And then I got Lincoln Mitchell's The Body Scout in ebook form, and I don't know about, like, I saw the cover of that book and I was like, I have to have it. They didn't even have arcs, and I was like, you give me this book. And yeah, I don't know what it's about. I think it's about like buying body parts and body modification, something like that, and sci-fi. But I'm just really excited about the cover, and I like Lincoln, the stuff that I've read from him, the stuff I've seen from him. So I'm just buzzing with excitement. As soon as I have time, I'm going to read it. The Buddy Scout by Lincoln Mitchell. And this is also one book that is out in the fall. So not out yet. But I do tend to read very kind of promiscuously. So I read in a lot of other genres. And one thing for our next column, which is going to be ecological sci-fi, I read Sherry S. Tepper's Grass. And again, I'm thinking about this book because it's this book where there's this world that is just a world of grass and like grass. And it's like, another Star Trek planet, the grass planet. But it's ruled by this aristocracy that is kind of evolved from British aristocracy. So they have these fox hunts and things like that in this sci-fi kind of planet. And there's alien life forms and all that. And again, I'm sitting there and I'm going, why don't we do more of this weird shit more often? So Sherry Tepper Grass. It's not new. It's an older book. Unlike Clarkesworld, it is available digitally. Clarkesworld, I had to go and buy a secondhand copy. But that's the thing that I like, I guess, the most about the column and just working with Lavie is that we get to go and dig and do these kind of mini archaeological digs and find stuff and see what we can shovel out. And it's surprising, some of the things that both that we have forgotten or that we don't quite see very clearly, because there's so much stuff that the publicists throw a lot of stuff that we really are not interested in and shove it in front. And often it's the stuff in the periphery that Lavie and I kind of are more attracted to. It's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Not so much the big things. We get a lot of stuff that is wildly inappropriate for us, but they're doing their job. They can't know what we're like.
Basically, the short version is that every book that's coming out is the anticipated hot YA debut novel, and only sometimes it's the sequel to last year's hot, highly anticipated YA debut. And that is literally every PR email we get. So
yeah.
Anything that isn't, I got a PR for an anthology recently, and I said, just because it's an anthology, I'll take it. I'm not sure I can fit it into any column we're doing, but the sheer novelty of having a publicist email me about an actual anthology. It wasn't the best of what they said either. So yeah, it's very, very difficult. It's a very commercial, very competitive, very specific niche market at the moment.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We are about time for the afternoon or evening for some of us. I'm sure Yi-Sheng wants to go get some sleep since it's the middle of the night for him. So just to recap, if you guys missed any part of the chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive it, so you'll be able to rewatch it from the beginning. I also wanted to mention that our friends at Brazos Bookstore, which is just about a block and a half down the street from us here in Houston, is also going to be doing a panel for the Best of World SF on June 24th, and they'll have a completely different set of panelists. So if you want to hear about more stories in the collection, make sure you definitely check that out. Y'all have all been so great. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Anytime.
So nice to see you guys.
Nice to see you too.
Thanks.
Bye.